So the most common question that I get asked is, I've got an APS-C, should I upgrade to a full frame? Is it better? Well, in this video I'm going to test that out, and I've got a Hasselblad 100 megapixel beast, so we're going to check that out as well. Thanks to MPB for sponsoring this week's video. Morning everybody, fantastic to see you all again. Well, I'm in the Woodlands, which is so exciting. We've got a little bit of colour, as you can see behind me. The conditions aren't great, but I'm scouting, and I thought it'd be a really good opportunity to answer a question that I get asked all the time, and that is, do I need full frame camera? So I've got my full frame camera, my Z8, but I've also got an APS-C camera, which is the Nikon ZFC, and Hasselblad have been kind enough to lend me the X2D, and this is a 100 megapixel medium format camera. Don't worry, I'm not moving to Hasselblad, but I think it'd be really interesting to get photos with all of these and then talk a little bit about them and why you might move from an APS-C to a full frame, or even maybe a full frame to a medium format. I'm going to print them huge as well, so that's going to be really interesting. But we've got to remember, the most important thing in any photo is composition, light, telling a story, you know, where you are. They're the things that really, really matter. I've also got my phone, and I'll take a photo with my phone as well, just to see what that looks like compared to these three. But in terms of quality, I'm going to look at sharpness, I'm going to look at things like dynamic range, I'm going to look at noise, all those sort of things, and I'll take exactly the same shot with all three cameras. So the conditions are quite drab, I suppose. There's not a lot of atmosphere. It's overcast, really a lot of high clouds, so really diffuse light. There's no rain, so it's quite difficult conditions to do woodland, but what it's really good for is just, you know, having the same conditions, wandering around, scouting, getting ready for autumn, which is a brilliant thing to do just before autumn's about to happen, because you get an idea with some of the colours changing. One of the things to look out for is the trunks. When it rains, the trunks get really wet and you get that sort of glistening effect. It adds to the texture, the mood, and you can see this is really dry, it's not quite got that, but it's still got some texture. Anyway, let's go and have a look down here and see what we can find. Right, I found a really nice composition here, this old oak tree. There's some really nice ferns in the background. It's so good. I really wish there was some fog, because I think this is going to be amazing, but it's all about scouting today and just looking at these three cameras. So let me just talk a little bit more about the difference between them. So obviously we've got an APS-C camera, we've got a full frame camera, and we've got a medium format camera. The obvious thing is the sensor size is bigger on all three of them. But what does that mean? Well, it means quite a lot really, because as you get a bigger sensor, then you have more room for the pixels on that sensor, which means usually that you get better quality images. But better quality images can mean a whole range of things. It could mean more resolution, it could mean less noise, it could mean more dynamic range, and that's what I want to look at. But I want to look at that when they're printed, not when you're pixel peeping on a screen, because I think really you're only going to get any benefit from these by printing them out, because there's just nothing on a computer monitor when you look at it at a normal size that you're going to be able to see the differences. You know, if you post it on Instagram, you're just not going to be able to see the differences. So let's talk about resolution first of all. So the resolution of this one is 24 megapixels, this one is 45 megapixels, and this one is 100 megapixels, which is quite ridiculous. We'll take the images now. I'm going to find some other shots as well. We'll chat a little bit more about some of the things like weight, but the conclusions are going to come at the end of the video. I'm going to print these out. We're going to really look at them in detail. I'll be so interested to see those differences. Okay, one of the things that's really important is the lenses, and just to make sure that we have some consistency between the full frame and the APS-C, I'm going to use the same lens but at a different focal length. So I've got the 24-70 f2.8, which is a super sharp lens, and I'm now just going to swap this onto my APS-C camera. So I can then take a shot with that. Make sure you stick around to later in the video where I'm going to be looking at these images in greater detail in Lightroom, and I'm also going to do some really big prints. Right, I found a really nice shot here. It needs probably a week or two to get the colours right, and a little bit of mist would help it, but I've got this really old silver birch that's got a really interesting trunk, a trunk almost a little bit like an oak tree, and I've got two other older silver birches going through the scene. And I just want to talk about depth of field, because this one, you need a little bit of depth of field. I'm shooting at 55mm on the Hasselblad, which is equivalent to about 28mm on my aps-c. And to explain depth of field, it's actually really easy. If we take like a 55mm lens, then we know that a 55mm lens is got less depth of field than something like a 28mm. If you take that to the extreme and you use a 500mm lens and you shoot an eagle about a few meters away, then the eyes of the eagle will be sharp, but the background will be really out of focus. If you shoot that same eagle with a 28mm lens, say, and then zoom into the same distance, everything's going to be in focus. So the longer your focal length, the less depth of field you get. Now, in this scene here with a 55mm lens on the Hasselblad, then to get the same field of view, the same shot basically, I've got to use a 28mm lens. So hence, I'm going to get less depth of field on the Hasselblad than I do on the Nikon, because I've got to use a longer lens to get the same field of view. And that's why it's more difficult to get everything in focus with a full frame than an aps-c, and medium format than a full frame. So I'm going to do a few things here. I'm going to focus where I think I need to focus, which is probably this first tree, because that's got to be in focus. And I'm going to set this to something like f/28, something like that. And we'll just see if we get any drop off in quality compared to the aps-c and the full frame, because maybe the aps-c does better here. Actually, once I've got it on, I'll take a photo with this 28mm really cheap prime lens as well, just to see what it's like. There's a beautiful little path going through here with the trees, and I actually think in the right conditions this could look really good. And I just want to sort of explain my thought process behind it. I'm not going to take a photo at the moment though, but so I've got this path going through here and this silver birch here, and then we've got this oak tree here, and I think that looks quite good, but I want to get a bit of an angle on that path to have a more diagonal. So if I move over here, I can create a diagonal with the path that sort of leads your eye more diagonally into the scene. And then also I think that this tree looks better on the left hand side. The problem is that I've then got some light up here, and I've also got to think about the light up here as well, the sky going through. So I've just got to probably frame it like that, but as soon as I frame it like that, this light comes through. But fog would really help this. If we just had a little bit of fog, it would just blend the top areas of the image just a little bit better. And also colour would add depth as well, because we'd have different colours that would sort of separate things a little bit better, because everything's quite green at the moment. But anyway, keep going. Right, well, I've got a Hasselblad, which is pretty cool, isn't it? This full frame beast. I thought I'd just say a few things about it. Now, Hasselblad have just lent it me. I'm not going to be keeping this. I'm still going to be shooting my Nikon Z8, but it just feels really nice, this in the hand, I have to say. It's really well machined, which you would expect in something that's like $7,000, I think, maybe even more, just for the body. but it's simple. There's not a lot of buttons on it. You sort of just get into the experience of taking photos, I suppose, with it. The screen is amazing. It's a 4:3 aspect ratio, this medium format, compared to a 3:2 aspect ratio with full frame. And I like that. I think it's pretty good. Just framing up this scene here, which is really nice. Got this oak tree, got some silver birch on the right-hand side. The colours of the ferns are changing. It's really exciting to be back in the woodland. Is really quite cool with this camera. It looks fantastic through here. So yeah, I like it. There's obviously a lot of negatives with it. Expense, depth of field, the size of it is quite a heavy camera. And also the lens, there's not a huge amount of long lenses for it, which would worry me a little bit, but it'll be interesting to see the image quality when we get back to the studio. Right, let me tell you about this shot. I'm just going to jump into the scene. So we've got a really nice path going through. I really like these silver birches sort of anchor the right hand side, and this fern down here looks pretty good as well, so I quite like that. You've got to imagine that there's a little bit more height. Even at 3x2 there's more height in the video, and then at 4x3 on the full frame there's even more height. And then these silver birches just lead your eye through to this amazing oak tree here, which just looks fantastic, doesn't it? It's got a little fern growing out of it, which bonus. Okay, so we've come to this river here, which is so nice. In autumn, this looks fantastic. At the moment, you can't really see much sign of autumn down here, which is crazy. It's so warm at the moment in England. But I've got this shot. There's a lot of dynamic range in here because the river here, as it's going through, has got a lot of white in it. Obviously, that's really bright, and we've got a lot of shadow detail. So I'm underexposing by about 1.5 stops. I've got a polarizer on. I always like to polarize and unpolarize shots like this, but I'm really interested to see the dynamic range capability of this Hasselblad. I want to see if a medium format dynamic range is that much better than a full frame or an aps-c. I suspect it is, but let's see. Right, I've got the shot. Let's head back to the studio. If you've liked the video so far, please give it a thumbs up. It massively helps me, and consider subscribing. Okay, back, and I've downloaded the images, I've edited the images, and I can't wait to show you them. Just a little bit about the cameras, mostly the Hasselblad really, because obviously I've not used a medium format camera like this before. It's 100 megapixels. It was a joy to use this camera, it really was. I love the feel of it. I'm not sure about the lens choice because you haven't got a super long lens on it. There's a lot of prime lenses, but yeah, I really enjoyed it, and the images, as you expect, are really amazing, especially the colours that came out of it, but I'm going to go into that in a second. It is actually the same weight. Speaking about weight, nearly fell off there. That wouldn't be good, would it? It is actually the same weight as my Z8 and lens, so there's no difference between those two. This one's way lighter, really nice to use, and yeah, the quality really surprised me. So let's get on to the images. So first of all, this image here, I actually really like this image. I think with a little bit of fog, that could be really good image, especially when the colours get even more autumnal. So this was the phone image, which was really good. We're going to print this out at A3, I think. So I'm going to do this one at A3 on phone, aps-c, full frame and medium format. It'll be really interesting to see. Then I'm going to print this image at A2, and I'm going to print this image at A1. So I just want to, first of all, go back to this image, and I just want to show you that if I just select this image and this image, the full frame and the medium format, then, and just compare, click C, then I zoom in, you can see that the medium format is obviously high resolution and there's more detail over the Z8 image. The medium format image comes in a little bit less sharpened, so if you want to, then you probably need to sharpen it a little bit more. The Z8 is just a little bit more sharpened, but the quality of the images is from both these cameras is amazing, but there's definitely a little bit more detail, as you'd expect in a 100 megapixel camera on the Hasselblad. The one thing I would say on the Hasselblad that I really liked was the colours and the greens that came in. So when I was editing this image here, I really noticed that I could pull out sort of different tonalities of greens a lot easier on the Hasselblad than I could with the two Nikons, which has made me think that I probably just need to just play about a little bit more with the files from the Nikons, because I feel like I can get more tonality out of the greens. But I did notice that on the Hasselblad, which I think is one of the things that they say, and they talk about a lot, their colour science being really important. It's minimal though, you know, and I eventually did get the images to look almost the same. So this was the Hasselblad image, this was the Nikon image. Obviously, the edits are never going to be identical because you're not starting from the same place. The profiles, etc., that as they're imported into Lightroom are different. In terms of dynamic range though, I expected the Hasselblad to have a way more dynamic range than these two, but to be honest, it didn't really. So this is the Hasselblad. If I zoom in, and when you zoom in on that on this Hasselblad, it is really incredible because you get a lot of detail. But if I go to the develop module here, and we're going to go on to the aps-c images when we print them out, I think, I can go and if I just reduce the exposure here, you can see that I'm retaining lots of detail in the highlights here. So there's loads of detail that's retained in the highlights on this. And then when I increase the exposure, you can see that I get loads of detail in these shadows here with very, very little noise, which is fantastic. It is shot at ISO 64, this image. So yeah, so that was pretty good. But with a Nikon, I get the same pretty much. So if I increase the exposure, you can see that I've got no noise in here and I get all that shadow detail. And then when I reduce the exposure, again, I don't lose any highlights. And this is not scientific, is it? It's just me just playing about with one image. You'd have to spend a lot more time. And I believe when I looked on DP Review that obviously this had a slight amount more dynamic range than the Z8, but I'm not really noticing it in the files. So yeah, the colours were definitely the biggest thing that I noticed difference between the Hasselblad and the Nikons. Again, when you look at the files, you know, if I chose the ZF-C APS and the full frame, these two images here, and compared them, then, you know, pixel peeping, obviously the full frame's got more detail than the APS-C. But I don't really like pixel peeping. I like printing out. So let's print these images out. And when I've printed them, we'll go and have a look at them in my studio, in my cabin. And we can look at some top-down images, some close-up images, because it's what it looks like when it's printed that's most important. Okay, before I go and do that, I just want to say thanks to this week's sponsor, and that's MPB. If you're looking to, maybe you've got an APS-C and you're looking to go to full frame, then I definitely recommend the Nikon Z7. You know, this is now a camera that's over 4 years old, I think, but you can pick one up on MPB. I just did a search here for a Nikon Z7, and you can pick one up really cheap used, and MPB's a fantastic used platform. The best thing about it is that all the used cameras on MPB are inspected and they come with a 6 months warranty, so it's not quite the same as getting something from eBay. I wish I had this when I was around, because I used to buy a lot of used equipment, and it's a great way of getting maybe a lens or a second body, or moving from APS-C to full frame, and it's a little bit more cost effective. So go and check MPB out. They're a fantastic used platform. You can also sell your gear as well. Thanks MPB for sponsoring this week's video. Right, let's print all these images and let's go and have a look at them. I've got a big photo and we're going to get onto that in a minute. Oh, but first, let's have a look at these A3 pictures. So, if you remember, for the A3, I had a phone shot as well. So I've got a phone shot, aps-c shot, full frame, and medium format. Well, first of all, this makes the phone look impressive because the phone shot, this is the phone shot, and it is really, really good. I'd be super happy with this as a print. The colours are different from the phone, and I used raw 48 megapixels on my iPhone 15. The detail though is so good. It's so good, and if you compare it with, it's a slightly wider shot. I actually used a 24mm for that one, but this one's slightly wider. But so that's the aps-c. And then this is the full frame, and you're really not going to be able to see any difference on here, so there's not a lot of point in showing you. And then this is the medium format, and if you compare the aps-c to the medium format, then there really isn't a lot of difference. I mean, to be honest, you end up picking it based on colour preferences rather than anything else. What I would say is, obviously, to get everything in focus from front to back on the medium format, I had to use a slightly smaller aperture than the aps-c. So there's slightly more blurry leaves because there's a bit of wind, because I've got a slower shutter speed on the medium format. There's not a lot you can tell at that size. When it really starts to show is when we go to A2, and then you can, I think, just start to see a difference. So let's have a look at the A2 ones. So the A2 ones, I didn't do a phone shot. We've got the medium format, aps-c, the full frame, and then we've also got a different one that I was going to look at as well. So let's start with the aps-c. This is the aps-c, and I mean, if you looked at this, you'd be so happy. It is really good. Obviously, I've got the 24-70 lens on the aps-c and the full frame, so it's a really good quality lens and it's sharp edge to edge. If we start to look in the middle here at these grasses, then can you tell any difference between the aps-c and the full frame? Maybe, if you're super close you can, but it's really hard. Where the difference is, I'd say, is probably when you pixel peep and you look at the dynamic range, because the dynamic range for the full frame and the medium format seems similar, but the aps-c dynamic range wasn't quite as good. And then on the medium format and the aps-c, again, it's really hard to see any difference, if I'm honest, because obviously you're not resolving that resolution by printing it. You know, you resolve around about 300 dots per inch, so pixels per inch, and it's just not big enough to resolve what you're getting with a 100 megapixel or 48 megapixel camera. I can't see any difference really, if I'm brutally honest. Maybe at the edges here, but that's probably more the lens of the medium format just being slightly sharper, I should think. So yeah, so no difference. Okay, let's have a look at the big ones. Yeah, I think there we're going to surely start to see a difference, aren't we? We're going to have to make more space. It's a big print. Right, let's have a look. So we're going to have to zoom out more. That's probably not even going to be able to fit it in frame, am I? No, that's zoomed out as much as I can. This is the aps-c. I think you're starting to see a drop in resolution when you get to A1. So this is roughly about nearly a meter across, something like that. But here, certainly on the trunk where there's been no movement, you're starting to get a drop of resolution. Whereas, oh yeah, I mean, that's really noticeable now. So if I compare the aps-c to the full frame, then the full frame looks way, way better when you start to print at A1. So I suppose you either, if you're cropping down to A2, so you've got a big crop, then you might lose some detail using an aps-c, or if you're printing at A1, then you really start to notice the difference in medium format. But do we see a difference between medium format and full frame? Let's have a look at the medium format and the full frame. Well, one thing I would say is I love the colours. I still like these greens better when it's printed on the medium format than I do on the full frame. it's noticeable. I don't think, unless you're comparing it, I don't think, I'd care. I mean, I'm obviously not going to move to a medium format camera. I'm going to stick with my full frame because there's so many other benefits to me in terms of video in one camera and all sorts of other things. But I do think the greens are quite nice on here, and I did try and get the greens on both of them the same, and I struggled a little bit. If I tried a little bit more, I probably could. In terms of resolution, this is the medium format, this is the full frame. Can I see any resolution difference? Just, I think, I'd say, just. It's so close, but I think I might be able to see just a little bit more detail in here where the moss is compared to there. But, oh God, I'm really splitting hairs, to be honest. At the edge, I mean, again, that Nikon 24-70 f2 lens is really sharp right at the edge, to the edge. I mean, yeah. No, I think they're quite similar, but obviously, if I went a little bit bigger than this, then I'd start to see difference. Well, what I did was, I did do that. I decided what I'd do is I'd zoom in on the trunk of the other one. So this is this image here. And I zoomed in on this trunk and I printed an A2 image of that trunk. So this is, I think it worked out equivalent to almost like an A0. This, but what I did was I cheated a little bit. I did super resolution on the Z8 in Lightroom, so that increases the resolution using AI. And so this is the medium format, and this is the Z8 super resolution. If I'm honest, I feel like the medium format needs a little bit of sharpening, and the Z8 is a little bit over sharpened. Obviously, you can't make detail, but it can approximate that detail. And if I looked at these two, I think anybody looking at these two would say that the Z8 is better than the medium format here by doing this super resolution. I don't know how he does it, but it is incredible. It's a little bit sharp. That's not sharp enough, but I think you probably get them quite similar. So I think the resolution benefit of medium format, probably for me, if I'm honest, isn't worth it. The biggest thing for me with the Hasselblad that I liked the most was the colours. I thought the colours were really good out of camera. I'm not really into that because I always feel like you can, with a raw file, generate any colours you want. But I did struggle. The greens, it seems to resolve, different greens. I really noticed it on this image here, like around here, that the tonality of the greens was really nice. The aps-c really surprised me. Printing it up to A2 looked really amazing, and then it's only at A1 that you really started to notice the difference. I found this really interesting. What's my summary of this then? So my summary is, if you've got an aps-c, even if you've got a kit lens, because we saw, I showed this 28mm prime lens that's really cheap lens. It's good. It's amazing. Most people, unless they're printing way bigger than A2, are not going to have any problems with that. But if you do want to go to full frame, then I feel like you do probably gain some dynamic range, you gain a little bit less noise, and you gain some more resolution, so you can crop a bit more or you can print a little bit bigger. But the downside of that is weight. This is way heavier than this, and size. So my summary is, don't worry. The photos, the best photos, and certainly if you're sharing online, nobody's going to tell what camera you've got, come from composition, light, taking your time, and going to places that are amazing when the light's amazing and the weather's amazing. That's the best way to get good photos. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been a really long video, but it's been also really interesting. Thanks ever so much for watching. Till next Sunday, bye.